The mahogany table in the conference room felt ice cold. Marcus Vance dropped a 70-page liquidation contract right in the center. He didn't even bother to sit down. "You have 24 hours to sign this, Elena. If you don't, 15,000 farmers in your little credit union are going to default on their equipment loans. They will lose their land by Friday." Elena's hands were shaking under the table. She looked toward the frosted glass door of the boardroom. Marcus laughed. "Are you waiting for a miracle? Because your legal team already quit." The door handle turned. The man who walked in wasn't wearing a $3,000 custom suit. He was wearing a faded yellow reflective jacket, the kind issued to municipal school bus drivers. He had a thermos in one hand and a cheap manila folder in the other. If you believe that the most ordinary-looking people often hide the most extraordinary power, hit the subscribe button and ride along with us for this story. 2 weeks earlier, Arthur had been sitting at his cramped kitchen table. He was staring at a stack of utility bills and doing the kind of math that kept you awake at night. The school bus gig paid just enough to cover rent and groceries. It didn't leave much room for a busted radiator or a spike in the heating bill. Across the table, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was fiercely coloring a picture of a purple dinosaur. She looked up, her nose smudged with crayon. "Are you going to be home for dinner tomorrow, Daddy?" Arthur swallowed the lump in his throat. "Always. Peanut, I'll never miss dinner again." He meant it. 3 years ago, he was a senior data security architect pulling 80-hour weeks. He had built systems that moved billions of dollars in the blink of an eye. But he wasn't there. The afternoon his wife's car slid on black ice. He was in a server room in Chicago, ignoring his ringing phone because the project deadline was tight. When you look into a child's eyes, you finally understand what really matters. If you put your kids above any job title, drop a comment saying, "I believe every sacrifice for family is worth it." That Tuesday night, the snow started falling hard over the interstate. Arthur was driving his beat-up Honda home after a late shift. About 2 miles from his exit, he saw a black sedan pulled onto the shoulder. The hazard lights were blinking weakly against the heavy snow. A woman was standing outside, pulling her thin wool coat tight around her shoulders. Arthur pulled over and rolled down his window. It was Elena. Her tire was shredded, her phone was dead, and the tow truck driver who had just showed up was tapping the side of his rig. The driver said he only took cash because his card reader was frozen. Elena was practically begging. She said she had an emergency board meeting in the morning and needed to get back to the city. Arthur looked at his wallet. He had exactly a crisp $50 bill. It was the money he had been saving for 3 weeks to buy Lily the pink winter boots she wanted. He looked at the freezing woman, stepped out of his car, and handed the cash to the tow truck driver. "Take her to the shop on Elm Street." Elena looked at him, shivering and confused. "I need your name to pay you back." Arthur just shook his head, got back in his car, and drove away. He didn't want gratitude. He just knew what it felt like to be stranded in the cold when the world was moving too fast. He didn't realize that when he pulled his wallet out, a small, worn leather notebook had slipped from his pocket into the snow. 3 days later, Arthur was sitting in the driver's seat of bus number 42, eating a cold turkey sandwich. There was a knock on the folding glass doors. It was Elena. She climbed up the steps, holding his leather notebook. "I asked the mechanic at the shop, who drove a blue Honda with a cracked taillight." Arthur reached for the notebook. "Thank you. I was looking for that." Elena didn't hand it over right away. She looked at the bus driver, then down at the pages. "I have 3 MIT graduates working in my IT department. None of them could understand the encryption algorithms written on page 12. Arthur's expression went completely flat. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just copy things I see in library books." Elena sat down on the front seat. She looked exhausted, like a woman who had been fighting a losing war. "I run a rural credit union. A massive fintech firm called Vanguard Holdings found a compliance loophole in our legacy system. They are executing a hostile takeover. If they win, they're going to liquidate our agricultural loan portfolio. 15,000 family farms will be foreclosed on by the end of the month." Arthur looked out the window at the empty school parking lot. "I'm sorry, lady, but I drive a bus. I get off at 3 o'clock every day so I can pick up my daughter. I don't fight corporate wars. Elena stood up. She placed a thick manila folder on the dashboard next to his steering wheel. She set the notebook on top of it. I didn't come here to ask a bus driver for help. I came here because the man who wrote those equations is the only person smart enough to stop this. She walked off the bus. Arthur left the folder untouched for the rest of his shift. But that night, after Lily was asleep, the silence in the apartment grew heavy. He sat at the kitchen table and opened the file. He read the technical breakdown of the cyber assault Vanguard Holdings was using to force the liquidation. His breath caught in his throat. The vulnerability they were exploiting wasn't a glitch. It was an audit backdoor. An audit backdoor that had a very specific, highly unusual code signature. Arthur stared at the strings of letters and numbers on the page. It was his code. He had written that exact architecture 4 years ago, when he was consulting for a federal banking regulator. Vanguard had bought the regulator's old software assets and weaponized them. They were using his ghost to destroy 15,000 families. Arthur stared at the screen for a long time. He had walked away from this world because it cost him his wife. But walking away now would cost 15,000 families their entire livelihood. Sometimes, the good we put out into the world comes back to demand a little more from us. If you want to give Arthur the strength to step back into the fire, leave a comment saying, "I believe every sacrifice for family is worth it." The next day, Arthur didn't quit his route. He drove the morning shift, dropped the kids off at the elementary school, and parked bus number 42 at the edge of the lot. While the other drivers went to the diner, he pulled an old, heavy laptop out of his backpack. He connected it to a cheap mobile hotspot. For 4 hours, the only sound on the empty bus was the rapid, rhythmic clicking of keys. He wasn't trying to hack Vanguard Holdings. He was building a mirror. He wrote a reverse firewall, a dead man's switch embedded directly into the legacy code he had created years ago. At 2:45, he hit enter. He closed the laptop, put the bus in gear, and went to pick up his daughter. By 9 o'clock Friday morning, the air in Elena's boardroom was thick enough to choke on. Marcus Vance was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by 3 corporate lawyers and Vanguard's chief technology officer. Elena sat across from them, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Your time is up, Elena." Marcus tapped his gold pen against the glass table. "We are initiating the automated asset transfer right now." The Vanguard CTO typed a command into his terminal to exploit the back door. The door to the boardroom swung open. Arthur walked in, still wearing his yellow reflective jacket, holding a cheap plastic travel mug. He didn't look at Marcus. He walked straight to the main conference console and plugged in a rusted silver USB drive. Marcus stood up, his face turning red. "Who is this guy? Call security and get this bus driver out of my meeting." Before anyone could move, the massive monitor on the wall flashed a bright, blinding crimson. The Vanguard CTO gasped, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped against the hardwood. Marcus snapped at him. "What is happening? Did we get the assets?" The CTO was pale, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "We didn't get anything. The back door is gone. Actually, the entire portfolio is gone. $1.2 billion just automatically transferred into an independent, irrevocable nonprofit trust." Marcus slammed his hands on the table. "Reverse it." The CTO swallowed hard, staring at the code scrolling across the screen. "I can't. Nobody can. This encryption signature belongs to the original architect of the Federal Reserve's contingency protocol." He looked up slowly, his eyes fixing on the man in the yellow jacket. "It's him." Arthur took a sip from his travel mug. "You found a loophole in my house, Marcus. I just came to change the locks." He unplugged his USB drive and walked out before the security guards even arrived. A week later, Elena stood in the gravel parking lot of the school bus depot. She held a contract in her hand, offering Arthur the position of Chief Technology Officer at the newly restructured trust. The salary had 7 figures. Arthur looked at the paper, then folded it in half and handed it back. "I'm honored, Elena, but I can't take a full-time desk." Elena smiled gently. "What if we make you an independent consultant? Remote work, your own hours, and you name your price." Arthur looked past her, watching the afternoon sun hit the yellow paint of his bus. "I have one condition. No meetings, no calls, And no emergencies after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My daughter waits at the bus stop. And I am the one who picks her up. Elena reached out and shook his hand. Money comes and goes, and corporate empires rise and fall. But a child's childhood only happens once. And you can never buy that time back. If this story moved you, leave one last comment saying, I believe every sacrifice for family is worth it. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.